Holiday misery as snow and torrential rain leave the treacherous conditions on Britain's roads. The North Korean leader enjoys some South Korean K-pop in another sign of thawing relations. And President Trump's making Easter great again at the White House. Very good evening to you. The South African anti-apartheid campaigner Winnie Mandela has died at the age of 81. The former wife of Nelson Mandela passed away in hospital in Johannesburg after a long illness. Nobel laureate Desmond Tutu has led the tributes, describing her as a defining symbol of the struggle against the apartheid. But as our senior correspondent Ian Woods now reports, she was also one of the country's most divisive figures.
As Nelson Mandela emerged from 27 years in prison.
In central London now is Mletsi Mbeki, the younger brother of former South African President Thabo Mbeki and a critic of the ANC. Very good evening to you. When it comes to the ANC, do you think Winnie Mandela divided people within the party?
Well, I think Winnie Mandela had her point of view, and she expressed her points of view very forcefully. The ANC is a very large party with very broad constituencies in it, and those constituencies have different points of view about what the ANC government is doing and what it did under Mandela, under Thabo Mbeki, and under Jacob Zuma, and no doubt there will be more points of view under the new president, Cyril Ramaphosa. So Winnie Mandela had her point of view, which I think was legitimate within South Africa.
She maintained a lot of grassroots support. How do you account for that?
Well, Winnie was a radical, and she was hugely charismatic. So as a radical, the people of South Africa, the large number of people in South Africa, gradually are realizing that they are not getting what they expected they would get under an ANC government. That's why she remained popular to the very end, because she was very critical of what the government was doing.
She was married to Nelson Mandela for, 38 years. How significant was her support to him?
Winnie's support to Nelson Mandela, I think Winnie's support was very, very critical in our struggle against apartheid. But it was also important after apartheid was defeated, because she had to remind the new elite, with the new ANC elite, that its mandate was to look after the welfare of the people, not after the welfare of themselves. So it was a very important constituency, and her message is still very important today.
Desmond Tutu has led the tributes today. He said for many years she was a defining symbol of the struggle against the apartheid. Would you say that's an accurate reflection in your view?
Yeah, I think she was that. She played a very important role. My father was sentenced together with Mandela, and the ANC had made huge losses in the early 1960s, but Winnie kept the voice of resistance alive, and that was very important to our struggle.
Some called her the mother of the nation, but of course let's not forget that famous quote when she said, "With our boxes of matches and our necklaces, we shall liberate this country." Of course, the necklacing referring to burning people alive. So she was hugely controversial, wasn't she?
Yes, she was controversial, but you must not forget that South Africa was a police state riddled with spies, and the people were unarmed, and they had to use the methods that they felt would deter members of their community for spying for the apartheid regime. Horrible though the necklace was, it was a deterrent. It was no worse than atomic weapons that the West used against Japan.
And I presume you met her. What will your memories of her be?
Well, for me, I was a great supporter of Winnie, and I still am a supporter. She had a lot of personal whims, let me call them that. But on the whole, she was fighting to get South Africa to go in the right direction, to benefit the majority of the people, rather than what we are seeing now, a small black elite that is benefiting from democracy in South Africa.
And she had been ill for some time?
Oh, she has been ill for some time, and she has been in and out of hospital. But that didn't stop her from voicing her views about where the country should be going.
OK, Maletsi Mbeki, thanks ever so much for your thoughts and sharing some of your memories of Winnie Mandela.
Thank you.
Now, Russia's foreign minister has said the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury could have been in Britain's interest because the government is failing to deliver its promises to voters over Brexit. Well, Sergei Lavrov also accused the UK and other Western countries of playing what he called children's games and said they no longer played by the rules which had applied during the Cold War. Lisa Holland has this report now from Moscow.
As Russia made its damning assessment of its relations with the West, the Defence Ministry released these images. The Spyrow investigation. Lisa Holland, Sky News, Moscow.
Teachers are warning that the UK is suffering from a child poverty crisis, with an increasing number of pupils arriving at school without clean clothes and showing signs of malnourishment. The situation has become so desperate in some areas that children have been spotted filling their pockets with food from school dinners to take home with them. Sky's Dan Whitehead has this report.
Ladywood in Birmingham, one of the country's worst areas when it comes to child poverty. It's not enough, say many families on the poverty line, who are relying on charities to simply get by. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Birmingham.
Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other news now. And doctors are warning that the NHS winter crisis will extend into the summer. The British Medical Association is predicting that almost 6.5 million people could attend A&E during the summer, and 774,000 people could have to wait more than 4 hours to be seen. In Syria, rebels have begun evacuating at the last opposition stronghold in eastern Ghouta. Buses have arrived to take them from Douma to the northern town of Jarablus. State television has described those evacuating as terrorists and their families. It follows a deal announced yesterday allowing them to leave. The death toll following last week's mass protests on the Gaza-Israel border has risen to 18. More than 750 Palestinians were reportedly wounded by Israeli fire in Friday's protests, making it the bloodiest day in Gaza since the 2014 Israel-Hamas war. Israel has rejected allegations of unlawful use of lethal force and says Gaza's militant rulers, Hamas, were trying to attack its border under the guise of protests. A doctor renowned for treating injured mountaineers has died in an avalanche in the French Alps. Dr. Emmanuel Corchi was among a group caught up in the avalanche near to Chamonix. 4 others were injured. One of the busiest travel days of the year has seen snow and torrential rain cause treacherous conditions on many of Britain's roads. The Met Office has issued yellow warnings for rain across Western England, Wales and Northern Ireland, while yellow warnings for snow are in place across Northern England and Scotland. Gerard Tubb has this report now from Keighley in West Yorkshire.
Easter weekend is usually the first big getaway of the year. The good news is it's getting warmer over the next few days, just in time for most of us to be back at work. Gerard Tubb, Sky News, West Yorkshire.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, President Trump's making Easter great again. We'll have the latest on that coming up after this short break. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his wife have been to see a rare concert in Pyongyang featuring South Korean K-pop acts. It was the first time South Korean artists have performed in the North's capital for more than a decade, and another sign of warming relations between the two countries. Siobhan Robbins has this report.
To a standing ovation, Kim Jong-un raised the curtain on his newest political play, his tune. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News.
Now, here's something you don't see every day. Donald Trump and his wife Melania have been joined by the Easter Bunny at the start of the annual White House Easter egg roll. A crowd of almost 30,000 gathered on the South Lawn for the event. And after speaking to the crowd, the president then criticised Democrats for their stance over the so-called dreamer immigrants who are living in the US illegally, having been brought in as children.
The Democrats have really let them down. They've really let them down. They had this great opportunity. The Democrats have really let them down. It's a shame. And now people are taking advantage of DACA, and that's a shame. It should have never happened.
Now, it is Easter. It's April the 2nd. Summer's seen snow. Let's see how the weather's looking.
From cool, brisk northern fjords to the warm, tranquil waters of Southeast Asia.
So I'm afraid for Scotland, tomorrow it will remain pretty cold and windy with rain and hill snow. Further south it will be milder and brighter, but there will also be scattered showers. This evening, Met Office yellow warnings remain in force for rain and snow across northern England and Scotland. Overnight, most of England, Wales and Ireland will have scattered showers, although these may merge into longer spells of rain across southern parts of the Republic. Rain and hill snow will continue to move northwards across Scotland. Tomorrow, central and southern Britain will start rather cloudy, but it will gradually brighten up with some sunshine, and it will feel warmer than late, I'm pleased to say, particularly in the sheltered spots. There'll be scattered showers across England, Wales and the Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland will see more persistent rain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, Alison Saunders, is to stand down after 5 years in the role. This is Sky News, the top stories. Tributes are paid to the anti-apartheid campaigner Winnie Mandela, who's died at the age of 81. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has claimed it could have been in the UK's interest to carry out a nerve agent attack on the former Soviet spy Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. Her teachers have warned about shocking levels of child poverty. They say many children are arriving for classes looking malnourished with greying skin, dirty clothes and no shoes. Let's get more now on our top story and that breaking news that the South African anti-apartheid campaigner Winnie Mandela has died at the age of 81. These are live pictures now from Soweto outside Winnie Mandela's home. She died this afternoon, and of course that breaking news, she's died at the age of 81. Her personal assistant confirming the news earlier on. Of course, for many years she was married to Nelson Mandela. She campaigned actively for his release from prison. And you can see those pictures of her on the screen at the moment now. She was married to him for, 38 years or so. Well, let's now go to Richard Dowden. He's the director of the Royal African Society. Very good afternoon to you. Thanks ever so much for joining us. How do you think Winnie Mandela will be remembered? Because she was a hugely controversial figure.
Yes, I think she's a flawed hero, heroine, whatever you want to call it. She was immensely strong. Her personality was quite electric, and she got constantly harassed by the police. She was sent to be banished to a tiny little town in the north of South Africa. She wasn't allowed any visitors, and she was regularly. They would come in crashing into the house, wreck the house, and I think it left her with a lot of bitterness. And the problem for the African National Congress was that they were always very cautious about the way they fought against apartheid. There were big debates about it. She just went for it. She didn't wait for any committee or any orders. She just attacked. And that got her into some difficulties. But also she, as a protection, because against the apartheid police, she employed what they call the Winnie Mandela Football Club. When she was allowed back to Soweto in Johannesburg, And they were not just protectors of her, they were also a pretty unpleasant gang. And then there was the killing of a little boy called Stompy. And it was found that she knew about this and that it was her gang that had killed her. So her reputation took a massive hit then. And then later on, when Mandela came out of jail, and that wonderful moment when they walked down the garden of the Archbishop's house in Cape Town, hand in hand, we knew by then that the marriage was pretty well on the rocks, and indeed that's the way it eventually ended, even though Mandela would have wanted it to continue.
She was, of course, a very divisive figure. I suppose many people called her the mother of the nation, but let's not forget that very famous quote that she said, "With our boxes of matches and our necklaces, we shall liberate this country." Of course, necklacing referring to burning people alive using petrol and tyres. Why was she so divisive?
Simply because of that. The ANC immediately, this necklacing practice started, the ANC condemned it and said, no, that's not the way we fight. But she actually actively encouraged it and was known to have been, well, whether part of it, but have been witness to it. And so there was this, as I say, this big gap in the ANC between those who were abroad, who were very sophisticated and very political, or even though they had a military wing, and then what was actually happening on the ground, which was pretty nasty and very violent. And she could have tried to calm things, but she didn't. She consistently raised the temperature and pushed back and pushed back. She would not bend to the South African police, and so, you know, in the end, you have a sort of a wonderfully passionate person, but probably not your best general in those circumstances.
Did you ever meet her? I imagine she's the type of person very difficult to get close to.
Yes, I do remember at Thabo Mbeki's inauguration. He was the president after Mandela, and I saw her and I thought, I'll just go and shake her hand. And she looked at me and then just turned away. And she didn't want to shake my hand. She wouldn't have known who I was, but I just wanted to say, you know, thanks for all you've done. But no, she just walked away. And I think she was, in that way, I don't think she had too many white friends, put it that way.
OK, Richard, thanks ever so much for sharing your thoughts there. Appreciate your time. Let's go now to John Carlin. He's the author of Knowing Mandela and Playing the Enemy, Nelson Mandela and the Game That Made a Nation. John, you knew the Mandelas. What was Winnie like as a person?
Well, before I answer that, let me just say that you just mentioned a couple of books that I've written about Mandela. I think that there's still a great book or a great film or a great play to be made about the love story and the relationship between Nelson and Winnie Mandela, who were both truly epic personalities. They were both giants. They were both heroic people with immense charisma, vast self-confidence, and the sort of people that in any room on any stage would just light up and shine in a way that nobody else would. And in that sense, in terms of just her sheer force of personality, as well as the beauty she exuded, you know, that was the strength of Winnie Mandela, which she deployed also in the cause of the anti-apartheid struggle to immense benefit. But she was this dual personality. There was this other side to her. And what I mean about, you know, this incredibly powerful love story that's yet really to be told is that on the one hand, Mandela, when he first met her, he was still married to his first wife, Evelyn, who I also met, as well as Winnie. I think it was 57, 58. He saw her, he was immediately thunderstruck, blown away, love at first sight. And that love, even though everything became very complicated, very soon after they got married, he was arrested and they barely saw each other and they're married. But that love sustained Mandela emotionally to a great degree during his 27 years in prison. He came back, he came out with the notion that they would resurrect their love again, but it wasn't to be. He saw the dark side of it, the ugly side, the criminal side.
Desmond Tutu has said for many years Winnie Mandela was a defining symbol for the struggle against the anti-apartheid movement. Would you say that that is an accurate description?
For sure. Nelson Mandela was put in jail together with the other top leaders of the African National Congress in 1964, and the whole black resistance movement went really dormant for about 10, 12 years. Then it resurrected in 1976, and in the 1980s, you really saw on the streets in a really militant, energetic and violent way, you finally saw the black people of South Africa losing their fear and taking on the apartheid machine. And Winnie Mandela was very much a leader of that defiance. I mean, there was her, there was Desmond Tutu, there were a couple of others, but she very much kept that flame of resistance of her husband alive, and indeed imposed her own tremendous energy. I mean, I remember vividly being in street protests where, you know, large crowds of black demonstrators facing up to white South African police with tear gas, with live bullets, with their dogs, and tremendous violence, screaming, shouting, people running, shots being fired, and Winnie would just stand there facing up to these South African white police colonels, looking at them in the face and just actually intimidating them, even though she didn't have a weapon and they had the weapons. And that was the kind of person that Winnie Mandela was at her best and at her greatest.
We're looking at pictures at the moment from her home in Soweto. Of course, there's lots of people gathering there to pay tribute. There seem to be people dancing. She was hugely divisive, hugely controversial. How do you think she's going to be remembered in South Africa?
Well, right now, inevitably, President Ramaphosa and Desmond Tutu and others are saying all the right things, and they're saying she was a great, you know, titan of the struggle against apartheid. But they know perfectly well, in particular, I know President Cyril Ramaphosa knows perfectly well that Winnie had this extremely dark side. She had this gang, a kind of mafia gang in Soweto. She was the kind of mafia matriarch in the 4 or 5 years actually before Mandela was released. And they perpetrated all kinds of crimes. They murdered people, they kidnapped people, they beat people up, they raped schoolgirls in a school very near where Mandela's home was. And Winnie was the queen of this mafia. Now, whether she was, you know, directly engaged with everything that happened, I doubt it. But nevertheless, she was found guilty by a South African court of assault and kidnapping related to the death of a 14-year-old boy who was killed by her own gang members. And as Mandela gradually became more and more aware of this dark side of Winnie after he came out of prison, you know, his dreams of rekindling this great love began to fade and turned to bitterness. And it's worth remembering that it was Mandela who sought the divorce, and at the divorce proceedings in court, in public, he was asked by his lawyer, would you ever consider resuming your marriage, going back to Winnie Mandela? And Nelson Mandela famously declared, like I say, in public, in court, if all the forces of the universe were to ask me to go back to Winnie Mandela, I would say no.
OK, John Carlin, thanks ever so much for sharing your personal memories with us there. Of course, you were friends and knew the family well. Thanks ever so much. The head of the Crown Prosecution Service, Alison Saunders, is to stand down after 5 years in the role. Her term has been marked by a series of controversies, most recently the collapse of a number of rape trials, leading to a review of every rape case in the country. Well, the search for a replacement is to begin imminently. Let's get more now on this. I'm joined from central London by criminal defence barrister Narita Bara and Professor Susan Edwards, who's a Dean of Law at the University of Buckingham. Very good evening to you both. First of all, is the criminal justice system at breaking point? Let's start with you, Narita.
Yes, and in the next 16 days you're going to see an even greater strain on the criminal justice system when the defence teams who've been taking the slack where the Crown Prosecution Service have been failing in disclosure exercises are also going to be affected by cuts being brought into the criminal justice system. There will be nothing left on the bone, effectively. It's all going to be shaved off the bone.
Susan, what's your view on this and what can be done to change things?
Well, of course, that's absolutely true. And the criminal justice system, as the Criminal Bar Association lead, Ms Rafferty has said, is in an absolute state of collapse. Lord Judge, the former Lord Chief Justice, has also joined in to say that we can no longer deliver a proper, fair system. And it's absolutely the case that really the problem is not just the non-disclosure, but it's the public funding and the lack of public funding for the CPS, which has been developing and grinding the system down over the last years. To hold Alison Saunders responsible for this is quite wrong, because I think we should draw attention to the great achievements that she has made in actually focusing more clearly on rape, sexual offences. Prosecutions for rape have gone up, convictions for rape have gone up. The working together with the police on rape has led to an exponential increase in recorded offences from 20,000 when she started to 40,000 in 2017. We've also seen protection for other victims in rape and sexual assault related matters, trafficking, for example, under the Modern Slavery Act. We've also seen the introduction of a new law on coercion. We've also seen, with the CPS driving ahead with prosecutions under the Malicious Communications Act in relation to sexting, in relation to revenge porn. So in fact, Alison Saunders and her team have done a lot under a system that is actually, I agree, breaking. But she is not solely responsible for this. It is a question of public funding which needs to be addressed.
Well, you mentioned things like legal aid. Narita, is there an element in this? Obviously, barristers have said that they are going to go on strike. Is there an element that obviously criminal barristers have seen their salaries go down significantly in recent years because of this? Is this all to do with salaries?
No, it's not to do with salaries. People don't come to the criminal bar for a salary. There are many other lucrative ways of earning a living. People come to the criminal bar because they want to fairly prosecute and ensure that the guilty are convicted, but more importantly, fearlessly defend to ensure that those who are innocent are not convicted. And that requires many, many hours of work over and above what people are paid. And we've seen the problems that have arisen with cuts to the Crown Prosecution Service. And as a result of it, the police and Crown Prosecution Service have missed vital pieces of evidence and have relied on defence teams and defence barristers in particular to work overnight. In my case, on one case where I had 60,000 messages which were served on me in the course of a trial, my client was acquitted. But that all has to be done over and above what we're paid. But the problem now is that the cuts being brought in will affect salaries from between 50 to 80%, and that's just not sustainable. That's further cuts to a system which is already being shaved down to the bone.
OK, Susan, what is the answer? Because, of course, there's money needed for the NHS, for schools. You know, there isn't a bottomless pit. So what is the answer for the government to get things back in check?
Well, the answer is to get things seriously back in check and immediately. This crisis has been going on for many, many years. Criminal barristers have actually taken industrial action in the last few years to raise the problem to the government and to everyone about the whole problem with the underfunding of the system. Judges are speaking out about it. And we see that in a report of the HM Inspectorate last year, in July last year, their own inspectorate of the CPS, Kevin McGuinty's report, actually made it clear that one of the huge and large problems was the problem of non-disclosure. But it wasn't just non-disclosure, it was the fact that money that perhaps should be put into proper investigation of cases, proper case management, was being spent in actually rushing cases through. But that's in order to meet a public demand for fast-tracking cases. So really there has to be a root and branch, as this report said last year, in terms of the underfunding of the CPS. And it's no point playing this off against other public services, because this is so essential to the whole of our justice system. Victims want a fair hearing. Victims want their cases to be heard in court. It's not just a question of fairness to the defendants, it's fairness to victims, it's protection of the public. This is absolutely fundamental.
OK, Narita Bara and Professor Susan Edwards, thanks ever so much for your time and your thoughts. You're watching Sky News. Coming up in the sport.
Thanks, Rebecca. We'll bring you action from today's programme of championship matches, plus.
Welcome back. Let's find out now what's coming up in the sport.
This programme is brought to you by Vitality Health and Life Insurance.
Oh, strong.
Getting active brings its own rewards.
Oh no, where's the sun gone?
Very good evening. Leicester assistant manager Michael.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, crowds have gathered outside the Soweto home of anti-apartheid campaigner Winnie Mandela. They've been paying tribute there after her death at the age of 81. More after the